Namaste and Hari Om everyone. Again, a warm welcome to the evening session by Dr. Vinayachandra Banavathy, an introduction to the Gita Bhashya by Shankaracharya. We'll begin with a short invocation followed by an introduction of Dr. Vinayji. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sah Viryankaravavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Vinayji, can I request you to come on video? Thank you. Dr. Vinayachandra Banavathy is the director of Indica Yoga, a platform that offers authentic, immersive, and transformative yoga experiences across the world. He holds a PhD on psychological insights in the Vedas from Pondicherry University, besides a master's in Sanskrit, English, yogic science, and applied psychology. Vinayji is a dedicated teacher who travels across the world conducting courses, lectures, and workshops on a unique blend of yoga, psychology, and Sanskrit. He is a guest faculty and resource person at various universities and yoga associations, including the Ghent University, Belgium, Zurich University of Applied Sciences, Switzerland, Vedanta Academy, Belgium, Irish Yoga Association, Ireland, and so on. He has had the privilege of being a tutor at the European Union of Yoga Congress, Switzerland for the years 2013-2014 and was the guest of honor at the same event in the year 2017 along with Dr. Anuradha Chaudhary. His publications include a report on the standardization of yoga terminologies for WHO, a book co-edited with Dr. Anuradha Chaudhary titled Perspectives on Indian Psychology, published by the Jain University Press, another book co-authored titled Happiness Indic Perspectives, besides a few articles, papers, booklets on yoga, Indian psychology, culture, and spirituality. In addition to all of his academic interests, he is deeply passionate to work with children and youth and is involved with several cultural and service organizations in varied capacities. Presently, he is a part of the founding team of Chanakya University at Bangalore. Over to you, Vinayaj.
Namaste. Sabhaye Namaha, Sabhasadbhyo Namaha. Sadashiva Samarambham, Shankaracharya Madhyamam, Asmadacharya Paryantam, Vande Guru-Paramparam, Shrutismriti Purananam, Alayam Karunalayam, Namami Bhagavadpada Shankaram, Loka Shankaram. Namaste and greetings to one and all who have joined us this evening to spend some time or to spare some thoughts to the greatest of the seers, the greatest of the masters, the greatest of the intellectuals that the Indian tradition has seen, that is Sri Shankaracharya. In fact, it is an honor to be part of this festival, ongoing festival series, which is being curated by Indica Moksha, specifically Nitin Sridharji. This is happening for last 4 years. And I think this series of events have inspired many people to go deeply into the philosophy of Shankaracharya, to understand Shankaracharya, to also spread awareness about the works and the philosophy of Acharya Shankara. So I think this platform, Indica Moksha platform in general, and specifically this series that has been continuing for last 4 years, I think has really been a very powerful medium to spread the thoughts of Acharya Shankara. So I congratulate Nitin Sridharji, the entire team at Indica Moksha, Lakshmi Shibram, and also our friends at Indica, Oti Ram Prasad ji and Srinivas ji and one and all. And of course, with gratitudes towards Harikiran Vadlamani Garu, who has been the source of strength for this multitude of activities that have been happening under the larger umbrella of Indica. So with that, I would like to step into the topic of the day. And before I enter into it, I just want to make to say this, put this thought here that this presentation today is by no means a scholastic exposition of either Advaita Vedanta tradition or Shankaracharya and his works, nor of Bhagavad Gita, nor of Bhashya of Acharya Shankara. So this is definitely not a scholarly exposition the way we have seen some of the talks on this platform, but this is only an occasion where I felt I'll share some of the things that really fascinated me as a student of the Vedanta tradition, especially while studying the Gita along with the Bhashya of Acharya Shankara. There were many things that really caught my attention. It was a moment of joy with every word, with every statement that was appearing there one after the other. So I just thought I'll share those ideas, those thoughts, those inspiring moments which I had as a student while I have been studying, or while I studied the Gita Bhashya of Acharya Shankara. So just thought I'll give an overview without getting into the details, just to put forth what Acharya does in this particular text. Why is it so important for any student of Vedanta in general, and particularly for anyone interested in the Gita, in understanding the purport of Gita, why this Bhashya stands out compared to any other Bhashya. So this would be the main focus of this presentation. With this, I'd like to begin with bringing the focus on the approach of Acharya Shankara. So on his personal front, yes, there have been a few presentations here which tries to bring out, in fact, I think there is a series that has been curated around Acharya Shankara's life, which will happen during the weekends, I believe. And there are many other sessions also in this particular year or in the previous years also, which gives an outline of the life of Shankara, what this man did in his 32 years lifetime. I mean, it's been more than 1,200 years or 300 years, yet he's such a powerful figure in the entire Indian tradition. What did he do in those 32 years that he's reckoned with such great power is something that really fascinates one and all. Okay, so if I look into his life, if we look into his life and work specifically, broadly, we can put them into three categories. Okay, one would be the commentaries that he has written on some important texts. That is one set of the works that he has left behind. The second one is what we call as Prakarana Granthas. These are original texts which focus on various aspects of Vedanta tradition. Okay, which summarizes, which in a very systematic and structured approach gives us an overview of Vedanta. For example, Viveka Chudamani text. Okay, so there are various Prakarana Granthas, which is the second category of his works. And the third one, again, a large section, a large volume of his work is with the Stotra Sahitya. Of course, there are different debates that go on in the scholarly community as to what texts are actually belonging to Acharya Shankara and what not. There are various textual rules and perspectives which allows the scholars to have this debate, and some are like really valid. Some come up with an idea that this text belongs to Shankara or this text does not belong to Shankara for these reasons. So for our discussion here, none of these scholarly debates are central. Of course, they are there, they're at the periphery. What is generally acknowledged as the contribution of Shankara is that what I'm focusing on. So largely I can put them into these three buckets. One is the commentaries or the bhashyas. Second one is the Prakarana Grantha, and the third one is Stotra Sahitya. In fact, all his Stotra Sahitya are also quite popular among people. So they're powerful, therefore they are popular. That is the strength of expression of Acharya Shankara, right? So of these three kinds of texts, it's really difficult for me to single out, yet I'm called to single out one set of texts which actually are the most, what can I say, as the tower house or the lighthouse of the work that he has left behind, and that is the Bhashya, the commentaries that he has written. Right? What do I mean by that, and for what text has he written commentaries? As most of you would be familiar, they are put together or combinedly they are called as Prasthanatraya or Prasthanatrayi. Okay, so you have the word Traya there, which signifies three. Prasthana, generally speaking, or a simple translation would mean highway. Okay, or three synergetic ways or three converging ways, three highways that converge. Okay, so that is Prasthanatraya. And of the Prasthanatraya, if you are familiar, for those who are familiar or those who are not unfamiliar, these are the components of the Prasthanatraya. The first one is Shruti Prasthana. I'll explain what it is. Second one is Smriti Prasthana. And third one is Sutra Prasthana. So Shankaracharya identified of various texts that were already available at his time. He identifies these three set of texts and takes pain, puts effort to write detailed commentaries on each one of them. First set that he identified, which is fundamental to the other two, is Shruti Prasthana, the axiom of revealed texts. Shruti is something that is heard, something that is orally passed on from generation to generation. That is the entire set of the Vedic knowledge, right? For a long period of time in the history of mankind, the Vedas were communicated, they were taught, they were passed on from generations to generation through an oral tradition. These were revealed texts and passed on later through oral tradition. Therefore, this entire tradition or set gets the name Shruti, something that is heard, right? So, of the entire Vedic tradition, what he did was he tried to identify what is the essential teachings of this Vedic tradition. Where can we find them? And that is where he singled out the Upanishads of, again, various Upanishads that are available, 10 or 12 important Upanishads. In fact, they are now considered as principal Upanishads for the very reason that Acharya Shankara has commented upon them. So he identified these Upanishads and wrote extensive commentaries on each one of these Upanishads. Okay, and that becomes Shruti Prasthana, the pathway, the highway of the Shruti tradition. Okay, the second one is Smriti Prasthana. Smriti, literally translated, is something that is remembered. Okay, it's axiom of the remembered text. So there are explanations as to why certain texts are called smritis. So they say that when the original texts were lost at some point of time, there was an attempt that was being made by people, especially seers, to remember them and present them across. And that's why they're called as smritis. But keeping that discussion apart, there are a set of texts which fall into the category of smriti, which in simple terms would mean those which are aligned to the Vedic thinking, Vedic thought, but of a much later origination. Okay, and that is the set called as Smriti Prasthana. Of various smritis that are available, Bhagavad Gita, in fact, the entire Mahabharata is called as Panchama Veda, the fifth Veda. Of this Mahabharata, in the Bhishma Parva, you come across this teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, a set of 700 verses. In fact, in retrospective, if I need to say, how did or why did Bhagavad Gita find itself such an important place in the Indic thought tradition? Precisely because Acharya Shankara pulled it out of the Gita and wrote again extensive commentaries on that. And that's why I think it also acquired such an important position in the tradition, right? So again, this is the second set of texts. In fact, here it's only one text, that is Bhagavad Gita, where Acharya Shankara writes a detailed commentary for the entire set of 700 verses. And the last one is called as Sutra Prasthana, the pathway or the highway of the Sutra tradition. The sutras were composed or written by sage Veda Vyasa, and they were precisely written in order to systematize, to remove any sort of apparent contradiction between one verse of the Upanishad to the other verse of the Upanishad, one statement of one Upanishad or one statement of one of the Vedas with the other statement of the same Veda or the other Vedas. So there are such mutual apparent contradictions, or there are gaps where people find it difficult and challenging to understand. So in order to give them a unified presentation, sage Veda Vyasa composed the set of 555 sutras. Sutras or short statements, brief statements, which try to succinctly put together the meaning of the Vedic tradition. Okay, so this is the last prasthana, that is Sutra Prasthana. For these sutras, which are, in fact, one of the characteristics of Sutra literature is brevity. They are as small as they can be, but that could have been easily palpable for a certain generation. But going or in the later years, people were finding it difficult. Therefore, most of the Sutra literature required an elaborate explanation. And that's where we see the contribution of Acharya Shankara, having again written a very detailed commentary on the Brahma Sutras for each of the 555 verses, along with very profound, insightful introduction. I think this is again one of the hallmarks of Acharya Shankara, the introductions that he has given, whether it is to the Brahma Sutra Bhashya or the Gita Bhashya or in the Upanishads. I think they carry a lot of beauty in them, apart from the profound insights. So these three, he singled them out, he identified these texts and wrote the commentaries, marking them as to why they are so important. In fact, we have a statement in the tradition, Sanskrit tradition, Mahajano yena gatassa panthaha, which means when great people walk a certain path, or when great people walk, their path itself becomes the highway, or that is the path which others follow. So if you look at what happened later, in fact, in the Vedanta tradition, you will surely appreciate this fact that after Acharya Shankara, if anyone had to make a mark in the Vedanta tradition, if anyone had to present their views in a effective manner, then they always needed to take the support or take refuge in these three texts, whether it is the Upanishads or the Gita or Brahma Sutra. Only then their views were considered to be having enough merit to be discussed among the scholarly community. So whether it is Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, Nimbarkacharya, Vallabhacharya, Bhaskaracharya, anyone who came later in the Vedanta tradition had to write, or they ended up writing commentaries when they had to present their own thoughts and views of Vedanta tradition. So such became the tradition later, because Acharya put such a powerful framework in place. So for the Vedanta, in order to understand the Vedanta, in order to get to the heart of Vedanta, these three texts have to be understood properly. That's where the Bhashyas, the commentary of Acharya Shankara, plays an important role. Okay, so that's why it's called as, later it got to be known as Prasthana Traya. Prasthana, the royal way, pathway, highway with these three traditions. So that's how they came to be known. Again, of all the three, my focus here would be on the Bhagavad Gita Bhashya. Before going into the Gita Bhashya per se, just a quick definition of the Bhashya tradition. Again, this is the beauty of Sanskrit textual tradition, that you have various genre of texts, and each genre has a particular function and has a particular characteristics and nature in which it expands or unfolds. So you have sutras, you have Bhashya, you have Vartika, you have Tika, you have Vritti, so on and so forth. For example, there is a whole genre of text called as Vartika, where the whole purpose of the presentation of Vartika literature is to do a thorough critical review of an earlier text by testing, by doing an audit of Ukta, Anukta, Durukta Chintanam. What has been said in the text? Ukta Chintanam. Durukta or Anukta. Anukta, what has been left out? So this is an important text, but this text has left out this topic. So a critical analysis of that, and not just that, not just saying what is there and what is not there. It also does a review in the format of Durukta Chintanam. If something has been said wrongly, why I am presenting this, it's just to bring to light that our tradition was not just a blind tradition. If anyone says that, I think he or she must be blind, having not seen or understood the tradition in the right light. Okay, it was one of the highly self-critical, self-aware tradition. That's why these genre of text was an important part of the tradition. It was never considered to be blasphemy to say that, oh, one of my past acharyas has did a mistake here. No, it was never the case. With all the shraddha, with all the right sort of reverence to the previous acharya, purva acharya, trying to present their ways in as right manner as possible, and then doing a review of it, saying, okay, this part was not necessary, or this part is overstated, this part has been left out, was very much embedded into this tradition. So never get carried away by any such remarks that, oh, this is just andhashraddha or shraddha jadya. Okay, that was never the case. So you also have this genre of Vartika. So there are different genre of texts. The very second category in the sequence is the Bhashya. So what does Bhashya mean? Bhashya is a very simple definition. It says, whatever has been said in the sutra or in the original text, you explain those texts, whatever has been said there, and while explaining, you might use something new or some word you might use. You might also have to explain those words that you have swapadani cha vyachaste. The words that you have used to explain the text, you explain that. You also focus on wherever there is some kind of contradiction or wherever there is some sort of gap. So you try to put them in a proper order and explain things in a detailed manner is a bhashya. In the grammatical tradition, you have the text called as Mahabhashya because it's voluminous. Okay, because of its volume, it's called as Mahabhashya. But you have bhashyas in all the different philosophical systems. Each of the sutra tradition has a bhashya. For example, in the yoga tradition, you have Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And for that Sutras of Patanjali, you have a bhashya written by Vyasacharya. Similarly, for Panini in the grammatical tradition, you have Patanjali's Bhashya, you have Nyaya Sutra, you have a Bhashya there. So each of the philosophical tradition has a Sutra text or a Karika text to which a detailed Bhashya literature has been alluded or expanded with. Okay, so with this brief understanding of what a Bhashya is, now let us start looking into how does Shankaracharya lead us into the Gita. Okay. So one, he picked these 700 verses out of the Mahabharata and wrote a commentary. While writing a commentary, one of the most powerful things that he did there was to write an introduction. I don't think there's any other literature that is written with such a clarity of thought with such precision or precise usage of words and terminologies, and which gives us such a clear understanding as to what is the purpose of this text. Why was this taught, or why was this revealed? All these things he communicates in just a matter of 2 pages. 2 pages in an A5 page. I'm not even speaking or referring to an A4 sheet. Okay. If you look at 2 A5 sheets, you can completely summarize. And I'm here tempted to read those lines and also give a very brief explanation. Again, this is not for a scholastic exposition, but to understand how Shankaracharya leads us towards such a beautiful framework or the context in which Gita emerges. He says, he starts with this statement, Sa Bhagavan, that is referring to Narayana or the highest divinity. He says, Sa Bhagavan Srishtvedan Jagat Tasya cha Sthitin Chakirshuhu. The great Lord, having created this universe, with the burden of maintaining it, burden in the sense, with the responsibility of maintaining it, Marichadin Agre Srishtva Prajapatin, he created a set of seers or people who were followed or who were led by sages like Marichadin Srishtva Prajapati. These are the Prajapati Brahmans led by Marichi. So they followed one set of approach, Prajapati, Pravritti Lakshanam Dharmam Grahaya Masa Vedoktam. They were taught a particular approach or practice of dharma called as Pravritti Lakshana Dharma. We'll see what it means. On one side, you had set of people led by Marichi following a particular path. On the other side, Tataha Anyan, different from them, Tataha Anyancha Sanaka Sanandadin Utpadya Nivritti Lakshanam Jnana Vairagya Lakshanam Grahayamasa. On the other hand, he created a set of people led by Sanaka, Sanat Kumara, all these people, the 4 great brahmacharins, and they were made to be the upholders or carriers of Nivritti Lakshana Dharma. So, in the very first 2 lines, we are made to understand that these are 2 broad approaches towards upholding and maintenance of dharma. What is that? Pravritti dharma and nivritti dharma. So these are essential. Whenever we speak about dharma, there are 2 broad approaches. On one side it is pravritti and the other side it is nivritti. Both have the words vritti, but only the prefix varies. In first one it is pravritti and the other one is nivritti. Pravritti is where you are into it with all attention and consciously involved. Nivritti is where you have consciously extricated yourself from it. So one goes into the worldly life with all awareness. One steps out of the worldly life with firm focus on the highest goal, that is liberation from this life. So liberation, again, it is not just a running away or escape, but a very matured growing and outgrowing of limitations that bound the human being. Okay, so these are the 2 approaches, Pravritti Lakshana Dharma, Nivritti Lakshana Dharma. So there were people who were upholding this approach, and there were other set of people led by Sanaka, Sanandana, Sanat Sujata, Sanat Kumara, who were upholding the Nivritti Lakshana Dharma. And see how he puts both the dharmas together when he says, he summarizes here, he says, Vividho hi Vedokto Dharmaha. The dharma that has been described by Veda is twofold. Vividhaha hi Vedokto Dharmaha, Pravritti Lakshanaha, Nivritti Lakshanascha, Jagataha Sthiti Karanam. He says, in order to sustain the world, Jagataha Sthiti Karanam, what do we need? We need these 2 approaches. We need people who are bound by their duties, who uphold responsibilities, who work consciously, so that there is artha, there is dharma, or kama, everything is experienced in the rightful ways. But just such approach is not enough. It's in a very simpleton explanation. If you really have to drive a vehicle efficiently, it requires both these kinds of balances. One is accelerator, you know the speed in which you need to go, and on the other side, you have a brake. You need to know where and how you need to stop or slow down. That is Nivritti Lakshana. So one is Pravritti Lakshana, one is Nivritti Lakshana. Both these approaches are absolutely essential when you have to effectively run a vehicle. Similarly, in order to be an efficient traveler in this world, you need to have both of these. Perhaps one of them would be with greater intensity. As a householder, my approach could be more focused towards Pravritti Lakshana. Perhaps at a later stage of time, Pravritti Lakshana might recede back and Nivritti Lakshana might take over through one's gradual approach towards life. But in some cases, right from the beginning, the way we hear about all these sages, whether it is Sanaka or Sanat Sunjata or Sanat Kumara, or in some sages, right from the beginning, the Nivritti Lakshana approach is dominant, whereas Pravritti Lakshana is almost nil. So both are possible, and both approaches are there, need to be there in order to uphold or sustain the universe. Jagataha sthiti karanam. Why do we face certain issues today, whether especially when it comes to sustainability? Sustainability is a big topic, right? We have been discussing this across disciplines as to how do we make our life, our approach in the modern ways of living more sustainable? By sustainable, we are just focusing on how to extend the usage of resources, or how do we bring in technology in such a way that even though I'm exploiting resources, somehow I'm still able to manage them for quite long. Whereas the focus on Nivritti is completely absent. But see, in the very first 2-3 lines, Acharya Shankara brings in this idea that for a sustainable living, if the universe has to be upheld properly, then both these approaches are absolutely essential. Pravritti Lakshana Dharma and Nivritti Lakshana Dharma. Vividho hi Vedokta Dharma. These are the two paths that the Vedas uphold. One is Pravritti Lakshana Dharma, Nivritti Lakshanascha, Jagataha Sthiti Karanam. Praninam Sakshat Nishreya Abhyudaya Nishreya Sahetu Yaha Sadharma. He says, see, these two dharmas have an outcome. Pravritti Lakshana Dharma, your conscious engagement with worldly life lead towards Abhyudaya. It leads towards prosperity. It leads towards to the right fulfillment of your desires and aspirations. That is Abhyudaya. Abhi-udaya. You are raising up, you are prospering in rightful means and ways. And the other one is Nishreyasa. Nishreyasa is the good or the best that can happen to an individual. So Nivritti Lakshana directly leads you towards the Nishreyasa, and Pravritti Lakshana leads you towards Abhyudaya. Both are necessary in everyone's life. Perhaps the degree to which you seek one of them might vary from individual to the individual. Nevertheless, Praninam, for all the beings, Sakshat Abhyudaya Nishreyasa Hetuhu Saha Dharmaha. And this is what we mean by Dharma. Dharma is nothing but that leads towards prosperity and liberation. That is Dharma. What was happening? Brahmanadhyaihi varnibhihi ashramibhihi shreyorthibhi anushthiyamanaha. Such was the kind of dharma that was being upheld by all the varnas, the people belonging to the different varnas, led by the Brahmanas. Okay, so people were practicing this dharma, and this is how the world was well maintained. And here comes his insight as to what happened eventually. This actually is just one statement that he makes here, but something that calls for a very detailed analysis. What actually does Shankaracharya mean? How does this affect society at various phases of time? It's not something that was relevant to his times, but you can actually see its application in today's life as well. What does he say here? He says, Dirghena kalena अनुष्ठातॄणां कामोद्भवात् हीयमान विवेक विज्ञान हेतुकेन अधर्मेण अभिभूयमाने धर्मे प्रवर्धमाने च अधर्मे जगतः स्थितिं परिपिपालयिषुः सः आदिकर्ता नारायणाख्यः विष्णुः भौमस्य ब्रह्मणः ब्राह्मणत्वस्य रक्षणार्थं देवक्यां वसुदेवादंशेन कृष्णः किल संबभूव. He says what happened later. People were following dharma, some were following pravritti dharma, some were following nivritti dharma. World was going, progressing peacefully. But what happened at that point of time? He refers to one point of time, but this is something that happens in a cyclic manner. He says, Dirghena kalena anushtatrinam kamodbhavat. Over a period of time, over a long period of time, people who were practicing dharma, they began to step out, or they began to lose that commitment towards dharma. He is not saying about some people who never followed. Okay, you always have those nutcases who go in all directions. So he's not worried about them. He says, Dirghena kalena anushtatrinam kamodbhavat. People who were practicing dharma, who were upholding dharma, who were actually the vehicles of the dharmic existence, in them there arose an uncontrollable seed of kama, insatiable desire, which led them in different directions. Okay, people who were actually following, they lost the path, or they lost their commitment. And because of that, what does it lead towards? And this summarizes the downfall of any society at any point of time. He says, because of that reason, anushtatrinam kamodbhavat hiyamana viveka vijnana hetukena. People start losing these two capabilities. What is that? Viveka and vijnana. Viveka is the ability of discernment, ability of being able to discriminate the right from the wrong, or the good from the pleasant. Okay, so this kind of ability to make right choice, that is viveka. And this is actually one of the biggest strengths that we possess as human beings, right? We have that ability to make choice. But just because we have that ability to make choice, just because we have that freedom to make choice, it doesn't mean that we can continually keep on erring and experimenting, or experimenting and erring. Of course, that can be there initially, but that should lead towards a certain maturity and growth through which you, on a continual basis, you make right or better and better choices, because you know, because you have the capability of being aware. Being aware will enable you, to empower you to make right choices, right? So viveka, and the other one is vijnana, to understand something with greater insight. So understanding and discriminating, understanding and discernment, these are the hallmarks of any developed, mature society. Just look at, when I say society, it need not be a larger society, which could be like a town or a city or a nation. No, I'm just referring to smaller circles as well. Okay, you spend some time with an individual, and by the time after finishing some half an hour or 20 minutes or 1 hour, you just feel there's so much light in you. There's a sense of lightness, and there's also a lot of light within you, and you seem to have gained something. So So that is when you have spent the time with a person who has a considerable amount of vijnana and viveka, right? So that is the society, like this is a hallmark of maturity. But anyone who is possessed or who is limited by uncontrollable desires, the first thing that happens is he loses his ability to discern. Hiyamana viveka vijnana hetukena. His ability to understand is clouded, gets covered up. And because his understanding gets covered up, his ability to make choice is also lost. Right? So that is Hiyamana Viveka Vijnana Hetukena. What happens? See how one is leading to the other. He says the first one, Anushtatranam Kamudbhavat. People who were supposed to uphold dharma, they lost their commitment. They got carried away by their desires, uncontrollable desires. In pursuit of their uncontrollable desires, they got clouded and covered in their understanding, and that led to the loss of viveka, discernment. And because of that, what happens? He says, adharmena abhibhuyamane dharme. With such kind of a situation, adharma, unrighteousness, started to occupy the space of dharma. Okay, so what was sustainable earlier, we started to lose that sustainability quotient. Just look at today. If I just come to the material aspect of our life, all our, when we discuss about sustainability, you can look at all the discussion. It's more about how do I optimize, how do I more efficiently use, how do I bring technology to solve my problem? But it is never about how do I control my desires? How can I be happy with less and less, more and more with less and less? Can I arrive at that kind of state? There's hardly a discussion that takes place around sustainability. Of course, I need vehicles to move. Petrol is not replenishable. So what do? Come up with alternative. Again, an alternative which I just keep on using them. It's not about how do I use less, but how do I use more and more, but something that is easily available. So now I go to electric. Now again, there is an issue of what do I do with the batteries later, which will be one of the biggest headaches of modern day. Right now, we are more enthusiastic. There is still a euphoric period where we think, okay, by shifting over from fossil fuels to electric vehicles or rechargeable vehicles, we are going to solve a big problem. But what do you do with the batteries? What do you do with lithium? Right? So there's again one new set of challenges that is bound to come because we are not curbing the desire. Because we are not able to curb the desire, we want to keep the desire quotient as large as possible and try to address it alternatively. While we do this, we are all discussing about sustainability. So again, that viveka is still not there. Because that viveka is absent, adharmena abhibhuyamane dharme, sustainability is being challenged by unsustainable means. Adharmena abhibhuyamane dharme, pravardhamane cha adharme. On one side, adharma is taking over the space of dharma. On the other side, completely independent of where dharma was, adharma is also folding or unfolding itself to a large ground. Okay, adharmena abhibhuyamane dharme, pravardhamane cha dharme, jagatah sthitim paripipalaishuhu. Saha adikarta narayanakhya Vishnuhu bhaumasya brahmanaha brahmanatva rakshanartham Devakyam Vasudevadamshena Krishna Kila Sambhubhu. Why did Krishna take birth? He just says, so this is the background. Now that the whole world was being led towards unsustainability, towards unrighteousness, to establish dharma once again, Krishna takes birth as the son of Devaki. Okay, Vasudevadamshena Krishna Kila Sambhubhuva. And why? He says, Brahmanatvasya rakshane rakshitasyat vaidiko dharmaha. And he used this term called Brahmanatva, which is which is a principle of a Brahmana. The principle or the core purpose of the existence of Brahmana is to uphold dharma. Why? It's the responsibility of all the Varnashramis. It's specifically of the Brahmana because, as Krishna himself says in the later part of the text, people who hold higher offices, if they don't perform their duties well, you can't expect the other people to follow them. You can't expect the other people to have the same kind of commitment. So people who have high offices, people who have greater responsibilities, people whose actions will have greater implications, it is in their onus to uphold the dharma. So the Brahmanatva has to be sustained first, and having sustained that, you can facilitate the entire society to go according to these norms. Okay. Tadadhinatvat varnashrama bhedanam. And in this manner, he goes on in another 2-3 paragraphs. He says, in the second set of paragraph, he says, taking specific example of Arjuna here. In the first one, you saw that is a general introduction that anyone who gets caught by his desires loses his viveka. So that was a generic introduction. Now he takes up the specific case of Arjuna, where he says, Swaprayojana bhavepi bhuta anujigrakshaya vaidikam dharmadvayam arjunaya shoka moha mahodadhav nimagnaya upadidesha. He taught this Gita to Arjuna. Why? Again, he explains later in the next statement. But here he says, he taught to Arjuna. What kind of Arjuna? Shoka moha mahodadhav. Someone who had been drowned in the ocean of sorrow, ocean of minus. Shoka moha mahodadhav. Mahodadhi is a vast ocean. Okay, he was completely caught in shoka and moha. What were the nature of shoka and moha? In the first chapter, if you look there, you can see ample examples where Arjuna is actually crying that, oh, these people, I am killing them, they get killed, or my family will be lost, or my family will lose something. So it's all lamenting about something. That is shoka. We'll discuss about the actual context later, but keeping the context outside, there's a lot of grief. So Arjuna is completely grief struck. Okay. On the other side, he's also moha, lost in the moha. Moha is nothing but, in simple terms, a sort of attachment where it is not due, a sort of ignorant attachment with something. That is moha. So all his statements, if you analyze in the first chapter, it's all around shoka and moha, grieving about something that is not necessary, and lamenting and crying, or speaking about an attachment which may not be there in the first place. Okay, so because of these, he has completely lost his viveka and vijnana. To such Arjuna, Swaprayojana bhavepi. In fact, there are 2-3 beautiful lines which I have skipped, where Shankaracharya says, in doing all these things, Krishna has nothing to gain for himself. What kind of personality is this? He uses such beautiful words, Nitya, Shuddha, Buddha, Mukta, Svabhavopi San. So Mayaya Dehavaniva, like having powered or using the power of Maya, Dehavaniva, he seems to have gotten a physical form. Jatahaiva, he appears to be born, whereas he is never born. He is Ajaha. Okay, one who has no birth is Aja, yet the unborn appearing as though he is born, the one who is formless apparently taking a form and having no personal gain to make out of this entire exercise, he has descended here to help Arjuna. Why? Because he's completely lost track or lost the discernment, lost viveka and vijnana. He is drowned in sorrow and attachment. And therefore, he has chosen him to provide the teaching. And why has he chosen him? He says, Gunadhikaihi grihitaha anushthiyamanaha dharmaha prachayangamishyati. While it is necessary to teach everyone dharma, Gunadhikaihi grihitaha, it might be actually helpful to choose one who has a greater potential to uphold it. I need to teach this for all the 5 people, but of the 5, if I have to really make it very effective, then I might have to choose one among them to begin with. Again, this is just to begin with, so that he also becomes the instrument of carrying this message across, right? Therefore, guna adhikaihi grihitaha, if that is carried by someone who is virtuous, then dharmaha prachayangamishhyati, it multiplies by itself. Therefore, he chose Arjuna, who was a Gunadhika of all the people who were there. Okay. Tam dharmam bhagavata yathopadishtam vedavyasaha sarvajnaha Bhagavan Gitakhyahi saptabhishlokashataihi upanibabandha. So, this teaching, what Krishna delivered to Arjuna, who was deluged in sorrow and grief and attachment, that whole teaching has been compiled together, put together by none other than Bhagavan. He calls Vedavyasa Bhagavan, God himself. Bhagavan Vedavyasa Saptabhishlokashataihi. By 7, put them in these 700 verses, and he has given it to humanity. This is the context of the Gita. Just in 2 paragraphs, he sets the context. And later, in next again 4-5 lines, he says, what is the content of the Bhagavad Gita? To whom is it addressed to? What is the technical relationship between the learner and the text per se? So these are some of the technical aspects. In the tradition, we call them as Anubandha Chatushtaya. The 4 aspects. Whenever you read a text, you need to be familiar with these 4 aspects. What does the text contain? What is the purpose of the text? Who is the right eligible candidate to study this text? What is the relationship between this individual and the purpose? So all these are put together called as Anubandha Chatushtaya. So what is the Anubandha Chatushtaya for this text? He says, I'll not go into each one of them, but I will just say that the ultimate purpose of this text, as Acharya Shankara puts it, is here. Brahma abhideya bhutam visheshatah abhivyanjayat vishishta prayojana sambandhabhideyavat Gita Shastram. Okay. Nishreyasa prayojanam paramartha tattvam. Something that helps you to attain or understand Nishreyas, the highest good that can happen, which is Atyanta Samsara Uparama Lakshanam. Something that will liberate you, something that will help you gain that escape velocity to get over this transmigratory nature of this world. So samsara is something that keeps on continuing. Samyak sarati, samantat, it converges all around. It captivates you from all directions. That is samsara, something that goes on in cycles again and again in a never-ending manner. So that is samsara. And this text, the purpose of this text is to help the individual to get out, to liberate oneself, to extricate oneself from the entanglement of samsara. So that is the purpose towards which this particular text takes the individual. So in this way, he summarizes what is the context of the Gita and what are the Anubandha Chatushtaya, what are those 4 important elements around which the text unfolds. So this is a brief introduction, as I said earlier, something that is in a matter of just 2 pages in A4 size, A5 size. So with that, he gives a clear overview, and without going into the details of the second part, let me just conclude in another 2-3 lines. There are very interesting aspects to Shankara's commentary that you can see across all the 3 commentaries, but more so in the Gita text. One, his language, usage of language is such profound yet simple. And his Chhatra Vatsalya, you would call it, something he's so affectionate towards a student that he takes pain to explain, translate, describe, or define any important term, even it appears in more than one place. He doesn't say, oh, I've already explained it elsewhere. Why don't you go to IBIT, go to that place? He never says that. He defines a word in one place. If a word appears in somewhere elsewhere, he also puts effort to explain it there again. And also his nature of samanvaya, making those right connections and right places. For example, while explaining jnana or bhakti in one place, he equates it with jnana. If he's describing bhakti, he connects it with jnana. If he's explaining jnana, he connects it with bhakti. He says, there is a verse which says, there are 4 types of bhaktas. Okay. Of all the 4 bhaktas, the 4th one is the highest. He's a jnani, and that's where Shankaracharya explains how jnana and bhakti come together. So this is a samanvaya approach. And there are also various places where there are a lot of difficulties in understanding at a surface level reading. For example, there is a verse called as Na sato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate sataha. There is a play of words between sat and asat, the sat of the asat and asat of the sat. So here he takes pain to explain them in a very detailed manner. So in this manner, whether it's his explanation, choice of words, his commitment as a teacher to ensure that the student understands each one of the word, to define them and explain them, right from the first verse of his explanation, which starts from the Ashocyan Anvashochastvam, the 11th verse of the second chapter. That's where the actual Bhashya commentary starts. Right from there, who is a Pandita? Who is Ashocyan? Like he describes each one of these words in a beautiful manner. In fact, that one verse, if I had time, I would have taken that and explained all the aspects of Shankaracharya's commentary that can be seen there. But this is just, as I said, this is just a teaser and a taster and an appetizer to enter into works of Shankaracharya, and more so specifically the Gita Bhashya. So in this limited time, I have made a very simple effort. I don't know how effective or futile it was, but the Gita Bhashya or the Bhashyas are like vast portions. It requires years and years of study with a teacher, preferably, or not preferably. As a rule, I would say that it always requires to sit with a teacher and to study these texts. Only then they make a lot of sense and they will stay with each one of us. So with this brief explanation, maybe I'll conclude here. And if time permits and if the organizers permit, then perhaps we can take a couple of questions. Otherwise, we can conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinayji. That was a very refreshing and insightful session. I am hearing something about the Gita Bhashya for the first time today. Thank you so much. We can take a couple of questions. So Vasudev and Rajagopalan is asking, does Vedanta Sutras and Sharirika Mimamsa, are they the same or are they different? And if different, what is the difference?
No, it's the same name for the Vedanta Sutras, that is the Brahma Sutras. It's the same name. They're not different. Sharira is the body. Sharirika is someone who is in the body, that is the Atman. So this is the Mimamsa around the Atman, the Mimamsa or the exposition around the understanding of the nature of the Atman. Therefore, it is called as Sharirika Mimamsa. Okay, an inquiry into the nature of the self. So it's same as the Brahma Sutras.
Okay. The second question from him is, Sri Adi Shankaracharya refers to the author of the sutras as Badarayana, but many scriptures say Vedavyasa. So does it mean that both contributed to the Brahma Sutras, and if so, any variations in the approaches?
Again, we have very little information on some of these aspects, but just to clarify the point here, Vyasa is not a name. Vyasa is a title. someone who organizes knowledge, one who classifies information and provides in a systematic, structured manner is called Vyasa. So there could have been various Vyasas in the tradition, but the particular Vyasa in the context or in question is Badarayana Vyasa. Okay. And he's the only prominent Vyasa that we know. But there could be other Vyasas also when some, for example, in the Yoga Sutra tradition, you have a name called as Vyasacharya, who has written commentary to the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. So it's highly unlikely that we attribute it to Sage Veda Vyasa or Badarayana Vyasa. This could have been other Vyasa. So Vyasa is a title, whereas Badarayana is a name. So Badarayana Vyasa is one particular Vyasa to whom we attribute writing of the Brahma Sutras, the authorship of Brahma Sutras, the compilation of the Puranas, and the classification of the Vedas is all attributed to Badarayana Vyasa.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Vinay. There are two more questions. Subhash Yadav says, thank you very much for your lucid and relevant to the present context presentation. Can we say that the present environment crisis points us to an age of nivritti by humanity, and how do we know when to engage in pravritti and nivritti?
Again, I don't think there is a very standard reply to the question as to when one needs to, or when to follow the path of pravritti and when to follow the path of nivritti. This is something that would emerge in an individual when he or she is in a right track of maturity. And in fact, nivritti is the sign of maturity. The moment when I can say, this is enough, I had the fun of it, I think that speaks a lot about my own development. As long as I don't develop this feeling, there is still a part of me which is wanting it again and again. So there is a sense of want that is strongly there. As long as that sense of want is there, then I would want to go back to that experience again and again, right? So when there is a lack inside that needs to be fulfilled. So that means I'm not making use of an opportunity which I got to grow, but rather just seeking something at the superficial level. So the moment we are able to reflect on such experiences, the moment we are able to stop, pause, then perhaps that swadaya kind of a sense, I had enough kind of a feeling would emerge, I think.
All right. Vijaya Jayaraman is very grateful that she joined today. She really enjoyed the talk. And she's asking if you could give her a reference of the 2 pages that you, I think, referred to during your session.
No, this is just the introduction, upodghata, what we call, to the Bhashya. So if you take any text published by anyone of the Shankara Bhashya, the first 2 pages would be this one.
All right. Vasudevanji has one more question. As an R&D scientist, I seek a clarification of Vivekam is discernment or discrimination and Vairagya is detachment. If so, then how does Vairagya become a natural extension of Vivek?
I think they actually flow or they grow hand in hand. As soon or the moment I'm aware of something, it also implies that I'm aware of its shortcomings. I may not be blind by its presence or absence. Say, I'm close to another individual. That doesn't, the moment when I'm not aware or I'm not conscious enough, then it's quite natural that I am so attached to that person that I am bound to his or her faults. I see only the good side and completely be ignorant, blind of the dark spot. And that is where a lot of problems happens in relationships. Okay. When you're too close to something, you can't see it properly. Only when there is a certain distance between the perceiver and the object of perception, then you can see it in its more holistic ways. And the moment you see anything in its holistic perspective, then definitely there is an absence, or again, there are degrees, okay? There's already a degree of attachment that, or absence of attachment that naturally sets in. You're no more blind towards its need, or no more blindly attached to it or averse to it. So I think they're very closely connected, and Viveka would have its natural implication on the kind of vairagya that one would develop.
Thank you so much. We would take the last question. Anjan Nandi says, your deliberation on his thoughts, that is Adi Shankaracharya's thoughts, in a very simple way was very easy to understand. Kindly give some directions in how we can refer to any of these commentaries. Which commentary can we turn to for our chapter?
See, as I said, what we have are the three important commentaries of Prasthanatraya: the commentaries on the Upanishads, commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, and commentary on Brahma Sutra. Again, it might vary from individual perception. I would not suggest anyone to begin with Brahma Sutra Bhashya. Going into Brahma Sutra Bhashya might require a lot of preparation, might demand that an individual is already exposed to certain things, because it goes to the heart of the Upanishadic teaching or the Vedic teaching, and it tries to see wherever there is a virodha, wherever there is a contradictory nature, wherever there is a lack of clarity, and tries to address those issues. So directly going there might be not advisable. I would start the first two either with the Upanishad Bhashya or the Gita Bhashya, more so with the Gita Bhashya, because there is one text that is also quite voluminous. You have 700 verses, and Shankaracharya is the only person who has taken pain to write commentary to each one of these verses, while there are other acharyas, they have skipped some verses, or they have put together a gist of a few verses in one place, but Shankaracharya has taken efforts to write commentary to each one of them. So in that way, it's quite voluminous. But either way, I would suggest that please sit with a teacher. Self-knowledge, of course, you can always read a translation and make sense of it. But if you really have to appreciate the essence of the tradition, Guru Mukha learning is absolutely necessary. Self-reading, distance learning is not the mode in the Vedantic tradition. While it is good to enhance your awareness, but if you really have to understand the gist, because there are many things that we learn between the lines when you sit with a teacher. So what is important is not just the reading of the lines, being able to read Sanskrit and read the lines and understand the words. That is just one minor component. Okay. In fact, the tradition says, Acharyat Padamadatte. From the Acharya, you get 1/4 of the learning. The other quarter, you learn it along with your peers. The other quarter over period of time. Okay. So in this manner, there are various quarters from where you need to learn and pick up. But when it comes to the tradition, it is always, I find it a necessity to sit with a teacher and learn. Yeah. So that would be the starting point.
All right. Thank you so much. I think we are running out of time, so we will conclude. Tomorrow morning, we will
Just if
have...
I can take this last question, I think this is
Sure.
Sanjeev North. It says, what is your opinion of Gita having 700 or 700 plus verses? See, I think this is where Shankaracharya's contribution is considered to be extremely important. Many people, even though there are many people who don't accept Shankara's views or his commentaries or his positions on certain verses, all of them acknowledge his contribution when he says, in fact, Acharya Shankara only puts it in the part of the Bhashya only says, whatever, which I also read out earlier, whatever Krishna taught to Arjuna has been compiled together in these set of 700 verses. Saptabhihi shloka shataihi upanibabandha. So that means for the textual tradition, for all these scholars, he already made it very clear that what we call a Gita is a compilation of these 700 verses. So I think that was one of the putting there in black and white. I think that is a very important thing that Shankaracharya has done. So 700 verses, yeah. Therefore, it's easy to come up with the critical edition also. These are the part of the original Bhagavad Gita. So there are no 2 or 3 thoughts or 3 arguments here. Sorry, please go ahead. Yeah.
No problem. Okay. So we can conclude, I guess. And thank you so much, Vinayji, with the wonderful session.
So once again, thanks to you, Nitinji, and the entire team for this opportunity. Thank you.
Tomorrow morning, we will have a session by Kotiji. Can you please? Yes. Dr. Tulsi Kumar Joshi, an inquiry about ether in Kathopanishad. Please be there tomorrow at 7 a.m. From 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. We will conclude with a Shanti Path. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.